Press Monitor 2 comes with a wiring harness containing all the items you'll need to install it on the press. It includes the switches that you'll need, a wiring harness with probably the last 12 to 18 inches of insulation stripped off, which exposes the 4 twisted pairs, and double stick tape along with a few other items to complete the installation. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on the twisted pairs here, and you can see that there's 4 colors. We have an orange pair, which is for the press handle down sensor, a blue pair that is for the press handle up sensor, a green pair for the rotation sensor, and then finally a brown pair that lights up the press light. Now for the 3 sensors, the solid colored wire is the sense wire, and the stripe wire, which is the one that's white with that color for the stripe, is ground. So what the switches essentially do is connect the 2 wires together when the switch is active. Now in the case of the LED light, the stripe wire is the cathode or the shorter lead, and the solid wire or the solid brown is the plus 5 volts. So the LED is easy though. If you get it backwards it won't light, so if it's not lighting you need to just reverse the connections on it. The sensors are simple micro switches, and what you need to do is use the common, you'll see there's a C terminal on each one. The common terminal is for the stripe wire or ground, and then the normally open NO is how it's marked on here. If you flip over the switch it's also marked as number 3. The normally open connector is for the solid wire. The extra terminal on here, if you need to snap it off or break it off, I'm talking about the normally connected terminal, can easily be snapped off by grabbing it with pliers and bending it back and forth 3 or 4 times, and it'll come right off. So the sensor on the right is your normal press up sensor or press handle down sensor. The sensor on the left is the one that is used for rotation. You can see that the lever has been cut a little bit shorter on that, and that just makes it easier to use for rotation. It's also a lighter pressure switch as well. So the tape that we're using for this is 3M strong double stick tape. It works very well as long as the surfaces are cleaned well. So you want to make sure you degrease or use some rubbing alcohol in the area where you're planning on using the tape. The other thing, and I'm going to go ahead and switch to looking at the press here, we're going to look at one of the sensors. This is the rotation sensor on the front side, and on the back side is the press handle up sensor. What you want to do when you put the tape on the press, and you always want to start by cleaning the press and then putting the tape on the press first, and then once it's on the press you're going to want to attach the switch. So you definitely want to oversize the tape so that you have at least an 1/8 inch on all sides to give it a better grip on the press. And you can see that I've done that here. In fact, I've also wrapped it around the front column slightly as well. So you want to oversize the tape on the press. The more press it has to grab onto, the better a grip it's going to get. So let me make sure I'm in macro mode. Yeah, I guess I am. Once you get the tape roughly in the area that you want, you're going to want to try to rub it in from all angles. In other words, when you're pushing it down, don't just push it towards the press, but try to push it in from the top and the bottom. Just try to rub it in from all directions to make sure it's as wetted to the press as it can be. So the sensor on this side, you can see that this is the non-tape side of the sensor, but the other side of the sensor has been filed. You want to take a flat file, and you can see there's some kind of like, it was better over here. Let's look over here again. You can see that there's it's not exactly flat, this side of the sensor. What you want to do is take a flat file and file the side of the sensor that is going to be pressed against the tape perfectly flat. So any of these protrusions can be just filed down nice and flat. That helps it get a better grip when you stick it to the press. So once you have the press sensor where you want it to be, you want to press it in real good, and then if you have a spring clamp or a clip or something that can apply some tension to it, you want to try to let it cure for 24 to 72 hours. It's tempting to use it sooner, but if you let the tape cure, it'll work much better. Now my experience with the tape, and it's probably 90 to 95% of people have the tape work perfectly for them. There's always that press that's just too oily, or it's not been cleaned well enough, or for whatever reason in that particular environment the humidity and the temperature don't allow it to cure properly. I've had maybe 5% of people say that the tape didn't hold for them. My experience with the tape has been that it's either going to, the sensor will come off within 2 or 3 days of use, or it's going to stay forever. Now these switches on this press have been here for 3 years and they're not budging at all. They're here for good. So in the case of someone where their sensor is coming off the press, one thing that you have as an additional option is you can use a tiny 3/32 drill bit and just drill a very small hole, and then use a number 2 56 TPI socket head bolt to clamp to fasten the switch to the press. Now even in that case, I would still recommend using the tape to control the up, down, and left, right positioning, and then simply use the socket head nut and bolt to keep it from pulling away from the press. That usually works great. So, you know, I do have a few people that like to drill and tap, you know, and obviously you don't want to drill a hole in your press unless you need to, but it's a very tiny hole if it does become an issue. But like I said, most people, the tape works perfectly well for them. So the press light, I'm going to go ahead and move up to this, is a small folded spring that fits in this hole, and you just simply use some cable ties to tie it to this tube and run the light through the center of it. The goal here is to aim it at your bullet seating station so you can clearly see the level of powder that's in it. So let's go ahead and move on to the sensors. I'm going to put the press monitor I have attached in diagnostics mode so they can actually hear the sensors be pressed. And after you get your sensors installed, you really do want to use diagnostics mode to verify that they're all working properly. So I'm going into setup, and I'm going to switch to going into diagnostics, and I'm going to test inputs, and I'm going to skip by all the ones until I get to the press handle down sensor. So how the test inputs works is that when you get to the sensor, and this is the press handle down sensor on the 550, what it does is it waits for the handle to be pulled down, and then you can see that the actual linkage presses that lever. And once I do that, you can hear that the press monitor is reporting that that switch is now pressed. Unpressed, pressed. So I'm going to go ahead and lift that back up, and you can see that I've oversized my tape on that. You want to make sure that you're not crushing the sensor. In other words, even when it's fully down, there's no pressure on the switch at all from the RAM. It's merely pressing that lever in. So let's go ahead and move on to the other sensor. This sensor over here is the press handle up sensor. This sensor is very hard to do because, or at least it's hard to understand, because it needs to be set such that, and I'm switching to monitoring that sensor, such that when the handle is up and at rest, you'll see it press it in there, it's active. But it also needs to allow you to go forward to prime and stay active. So you can see up at rest, push forward to prime, both have the sensor active. When I go to pull the switch or pull the press handle so that it's on its way down, then it's no longer active. So you can see that I've put a slight bend on this switch to make sure that it contacts. It's just a little easier to do that in some cases. So let's go ahead and move on to the rotation sensor. I'm now monitoring the rotation sensor. This is the one with the half lever. Let me steady my hand here. The idea here is that it's mounted such that when the star goes by it, it simply runs right across the side of it and activates the switch as it goes by. Now this normally happens pretty fast, that's why you can hear it kind of blip. The only thing you want to be careful with this sensor on is that if you ever go backwards with your star, which is probably not a real good idea, you want to make sure you press the sensor in before you go backwards, because it only really goes in the one direction. So that's how the rotation sensor works. The sensors are really pretty easy to install. The first time I came out here to do this, it went much easier than I thought it was going to go. So it's just a matter of you know, making sure that you get the surfaces cleaned properly so that the tape adheres well. Now on this sensor you can see that it actually was a good idea for me to snap off that other terminal that I wasn't using because I got a little more room from the sensor. Now the shrink wrap, you want to put that on before you wrap the wire on there and solder it. That way you can just simply push it up into place and apply a little bit of heat. Once you do that, you should be good to go. So let me see if there's anything that I'm missing here. I think that covers it. If you have any questions, please just drop us an email and ask us. Most people get their press harness installed very easily and without a whole lot of difficulty. So just let me know if you have any problems. Have a nice day.